a small thing in the grand cosmos. Many, many years ago, when I say many, I mean probably 40 years ago, National Geographic put you know how they used to have fold-out pages? They may still, I don't subscribe anymore, but they used to have fold-out pages in their magazine. And I subscribed at one time 35, 40 years ago sometime. And one particular month, the fold-out page was of the universe that we have measured as we know it. And it's such a beautiful piece of paper. I took it out of the magazine, unfolded it, and unfolded it was about this big. It was a great little insert in the National Geographic. And before I read anything about it, I just looked at that map of the universe and I tried to see where is our solar system. I know it's on here somewhere. And I could not see our solar system, so finally I read the fine print. Our solar system is in quadrant, and it listed it E to 13 or whatever. And I looked down, and it was a little tiny blip, only it wasn't our solar system, it was our galaxy, the Milky Way. We're in the galaxy, the Milky Way. And I looked at this fold-out, colored, beautiful thing of the maps that we can guess at, and I think a lot of it's still a guess. You know, the orbital measurement of stars is different from one side of the earth from the other, pretty much like your eye is different from one side to the other, moves things, and they have to take, on this side it's there, and on this side it's there, and they take the intersection of those two lines. That's where that star really resides, 10 million light years away. So we've put together the maps the best we can. And then there was this little tiny dot down here, and that dot represented the Milky Way. And I remember just laying it out on the table and marveling, how did God find us? Down here in this little speck of dust, how did God find us? How did all this come to be? And in the middle of looking at that, one great word came to mind, and that was insignificant. I must be awfully insignificant to a God who has that entire universe as his playground. How small we are, how insignificant we can feel, how unimportant our lives might be to the grand scheme of things, and especially when we mess them up as we do. I don't know sometimes how hard it is to find any worth and value or any significance in our place on earth. The earth keeps spinning, we keep dying, the dust goes back to the dust that it came from, spirit goes to God who gave it. How big is heaven? Somebody asked one time after looking at this entire kind of picture, you might wonder, which planet out there is heaven on? But how do you know it's on any of those? How do you know that whole universe that you and I know is just not in some big jar sitting on a shelf in God's kingdom? How many spirits of man can fit on the head of a pin? Because when you shed this mortal body, this flesh and blood, and the only thing left is your spirit, how much room does a spirit occupy? Might you not put 1 million spirits on the head of a pin when they have no need of a body? Maybe we're just in the laboratory of heaven, God's kingdom. I don't know. Why bother trying to figure that out? I have enough time trying to figure out how to pay next month's bills, how to survive my children. I meant grandchildren. You understand what I'm saying? Aren't those the things you wrestle with? How to put gas in your car? How to get past this pain that you don't feel like you got enough money to go deal with at a doctor? How to solve the crisis between you and your neighbor or your wife or husband? Look at Matthew, the 1st chapter, starting with verse 1. Yes, we read that entire text. The record of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, son of David, son of Abraham. Abraham was father of Isaac. Isaac, you thought I was joking, didn't you? We're reading it. Isaac, the father of Jacob, Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah, there's a secret in here. Watch for it while we're reading it. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. And Obed, the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David the king. David was the father of Solomon by Bathsheba, who had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam, the father of Abijah. Abijah, the father of Asa. Asa was the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat, the father of Joram. Joram, the father of Uzziah. Uzziah was the father of Jotham. Jotham, the father of Ahaz. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh. Manasseh, the father of Ammon. Ammon, the father of Josiah. Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. After the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel, the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel, the father of Abihud. Abihud, the father of Eliakim. Eliakim, the father of Azor. Azor, the father of Zadok. Zadok, the father of Achim. Achim, the father of Eliud. Eliud, the father of Eleazar. Eleazar, the father of Mathan. Mathan, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Joseph. Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Every one of those names was a story. Every one of those, I mean, just imagine how much is contained right here in these 16 verses. Abraham. Started with Abraham. God called him out, made a covenant with him. Going to make a covenant with you, Abraham, and everything hereafter will hinge on that covenant. Abraham bore a son named Isaac. Isaac bore a son named Jacob. And then here comes, and you realize every name is representing anywhere from 40 to 100 years of life, of living, of pain, of suffering and sorrow, of prosperity or the lack thereof, of failure, of shame. And then did you see what I'm looking for? Did anybody catch the secret through there? Did you see it? I highlighted the name so you'd catch it. Did you see that? What's the significance? Hey, that's the only women named in all this. These are all men, because that's the way you counted genealogy. The genealogy, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. You count it by the man, the patriarch of the family. And you still do. They didn't get counted in it, except that you come to, they just felt the need you had to throw that in there. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And Tamar was just an insignificant character, but she got named in the story because her story was significant enough to get her named. And then he comes to another woman. Solomon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. Another woman. Only 3 women got named in the entire list of stories, huh? Well, Bathsheba doesn't count because we're not going to count her today. She was a nasty woman. She was hiding. You think she didn't know the roof was up there? The window overlooked her place. She doesn't fit our narrative today. We only want clean people. So we didn't include Bathsheba because she clearly manipulated for the king to see her taking a bath naked. Well, Mary is the bottom. She's not, she's just at the bottom. I like how you fell into my trap about Bathsheba. Clearly you don't know the story of Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth. The only women that got named in this story had a story of their own. And their stories were so weird that it would be difficult to tell them today in a mixed age congregation. I'm going to hit the gist of it just so you know. Tamar, Now, you already know Bathsheba. You know, I mean, I just gave you her little synopsis. Her husband was away at war. Clearly, well, the problem clearly is not the earpiece. We'll work on it from now on and try to figure out what it is. Where was I? Tamar, Rahab, Ruth. You know, Bathsheba's husbands were away at war when she just happened to get up on her roof underneath the king's window. So you know her. You don't know these ladies. I mean, you might. Some of you will because you've read that. But let me give you the gist of the story, the safe version of the story for today. Tamar married a young woman, you know, married the boy down the road, and he died. And the rule of the land was that the next son in line, you know, Judah's oldest son marries her, and then her son dies, leaves the young woman unmarried, and so the next oldest boy would take over. Doesn't matter that he's married; he takes that woman in for his wife. And so that was the law of the day. That's what you do. So his next son, Judah's next boy, takes her in. He dies freakishly. Now this young childbearing age woman is widowed twice, but thank goodness Judah has another boy, a younger one. And so Judah promises her, okay, look, I'll give you to him. He needs to finish some work around the farm and grow a little bit, but then whatever. Yeah, he was stalling. He didn't want to give his third son to this widower maker. And it pretty much indicates that. Nope. I mean, yep, you can have him, but it's going to have to, got a lot of stuff we got to do for paperwork. Got some government paperwork. Got to fill out some government paperwork, and then you can have him, only he never intended to. And she knew it. And finally, when every appeal had been exhausted, she knew she had been duped. And she was never going to marry that boy. And she would be considered tainted goods, for lack of a better phrase. Meaning that no other man in town is going to offer his son for her. She's done. She's a young woman with a lot of life left to live, but she's not going to get a third husband, and she's never going to have children, and that's it. And she should go away quietly into oblivion and just be a widow twice made. Only she figured that she knew Judah by now, and he wasn't the coolest of men. And he would be very inclined, should he go into a nearby village some evening, he would be inclined to pay for the company of a woman. And she disguised herself as that kind of woman on a time when she knew he was taking a trip. You getting the picture? But get the picture. Really get the picture where she's named. This woman, this insignificant, scheming, low-life woman seduced her ex-father-in-law. Maybe to punish him because he never made good on his promise for the third son. But nonetheless, it works. And she keeps the candles off, and he has no clue. And he can't pay her, so she says, leave me something as a token of guarantee that you will pay me. and he leaves her his signet and his staff. And he goes back later to pay, and he can't find the town hooker. And he asked the men of the town, where is that, And they said, there's nobody like that here. What are you talking about? And so he goes away and says, well, I guess all I lost was my signet, my staff. And then a few months later, people are saying, hey, have you heard about your ex-daughter-in-law? She's come up with a child. She's a bad woman. She's gone off and got herself. And Judah, self-righteous Judah, says, burn her at the stake. If you're guaranteed she's pregnant, I want her. And Judah puts out the decree for her to be executed, burned at the stake. And before they can do their due government, this sounds like a bad TV story, doesn't it? It sounds like one of those TVs you sit up late at night and you say, oh my Lord, why did I watch that? That is so bad. That left me with such a bad taste. Dear Lord, I wish I'd have just gone to bed. That's what this story is not pretty. She sends the artifacts to the man who had the power to call for her execution. She said, send these things to him and tell him, the man who owned these is the father of my child. Imagine Judah's surprise. Whoops. Surprise, surprise. Well, let's rescind that order. Do not burn her. One verse says, but he never knew her again. He at least had enough class to know he had been snookered and to not take her as his wife intimately, but at least allow Perez to be born. And Perez is in the bloodline of Jesus and continues the bloodline for a couple of generations until Rahab enters the picture. Even the New Testament names Rahab in the roll call of the heroes of faith in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. And you know how it names her? It's just up there with important people. This one and that one and this one and Moses and Rahab the harlot. Yeah, that's her story. She had no idea when those strange men walked into town and she walked up to get acquainted with them and found out they were there to spy out the city. And something in her clicked and said, I got a hunch these guys are connected to something powerful. I bet they're really going to destroy this place. I want to save me and my family. You guys want to hide? Come hide in my place. Yeah, it's got a lot of soft stuff up there, a lot of cheap velour, strange smelling candles. But you're welcome to hide out there. What do you want in return? I want me and my family to be saved. I don't care if you kill the rest of the whole time. I want me and my family out of here. Well, then you drop a red rope. You can't make it. This is not bad TV. You can't make this up. It's in the scripture. You think that woman stood there one day and thought, I'm making the best choice of my life. I am going to be in the bloodline of the Messiah. No. All she was scratching to survive, saving her neck. She had no clue. She was part of a big, big story. And Ruth, I know you think Ruth is, like such a great book named after her, so she's such a great woman. Woman said to her mother-in-law, thy people shall be my, I want that said at my wedding. Thy people shall be my people. And we use that in a lot of weddings. It's sweet, it's nice. And she was not quite like the other women, except they did know that Boaz was the wealthiest man around. And she was also the widow. Her husband had died, and Naomi's other son, and his wife, her other boy had died, and she's left with 2 daughters-in-law, and one of the daughters-in-law finally says, I'm going back to my folks and see if I can hustle something up. And Ruth said, I'm just staying with you forever. I'm never going to leave you. Your people will be my people. And that's the way it's going to be. And okay, but Naomi, her mother-in-law, went back to her kinsfolks, and she knew Boaz was a wealthy landowner. And she told Ruth one night, said, look, here's the thing. They're up there celebrating and partying. Now, you got to get his attention. So when he's drunk well and he's full and he goes up and goes to bed, you go in and uncover his feet, and then you lay down and cover his feet with your body. Quietly, in the middle of the night. Keep him warm. Flesh against flesh. You cover yourself. And when he wakes up, he will say, oh my, what's going on here? He'll notice you. I know you wanted me to tell the story about dropping handfuls of purpose out in the field, but no. Ruth and Naomi were conspirers. Why? Because either one of them saw the vision and had an instinct for the future, because they were trying to get to a place they didn't have to beg for grain in the field anymore. And they were just surviving. I can't really call this a sermon today. Let's just call this a talk. Because I find Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth to be characteristic of elements of all of us. They had no pedigree. They did recognize the value of lineage, the family honor, but they had to work to get what they wanted, and they worked and they won. They got what did they want? They wanted survival. They weren't trying to become part of the lineage. They never knew they'd be listed in a book called Matthew and the roll call of the ancestry of the Messiah's earthly. They didn't know that. They didn't even care about that. They didn't look beyond a meal next week. What can I do to live and survive? And in some way, they worked their way into the agreements that they needed. They figured out how to hustle an ex-father-in-law. They figured out how to get the attention of the wealthy landowner. They believed in a handful of spies and bribed and paid their way to just get her and her mom and dad saved, and everybody else is going to die. All it was just survival, living. And in doing what they did, they became a little part of a big, big story. Go to the second screen, next screen, too, that says our story becomes the only thing we can see. That's what happens to all of us. The reason I want to say it is because of the screen that I just skipped over. There's a phrase in there about Ruth. It's a long story, and it's not part of the message, so I don't really want to belabor the point. But we'll back up to that screen, and I'll show you the phrase. You see the phrase right there in the middle, his reasoning, lest I jeopardize my own inheritance. That's a phrase I want. Just forget the rest of the story, but that phrase. The story is that Boaz was not the next in line to take Ruth. Turns out they didn't know it, but there was somebody else. Naomi and Ruth conspired to get Boaz's attention, assuming he was next in line in the family lineage, but there was another near kinsman, a redeemer, they didn't know about, and Boaz had to offer her. Boaz was clever. He knew who had warmed his feet and slept in his bed. So he was clever. He said to the other kinsman, you have a parcel of land that you can buy if you have the money. It belongs to Naomi. And the parcel is yours. You're next in line if you want the land. He said, I want it. And then after he said, I want it, then Boaz said, now, however, you have to take Ruth. Ruth is part of the package. You make sure your wife understands you're bringing another woman home that you don't know. Her name is Ruth. She comes with the territory you have to buy. And he said, I don't want to mess up my own life. I don't want to mess up my own story. Now, I understand he wouldn't have been in the heritage anyway, but I only wanted to use that phrase so I could go back and make the point on the next screen, and that is that you and I, sometimes our story is the only story that matters. I don't want to mess my inheritance up. Hey, buddy, You might be tapping into a bigger story than you can imagine. Yeah, I don't care. I'm not going to take that woman. Not going to take you. You do it, Boaz. And so we get to read, and Boaz begat by Ruth. And we're just 2 generations from David. Whoo! Obed and Jesse and David. But I just like that phrase because that phrase from this guy is kind of sums up me. I can't tell you how many times I probably passed over some great opportunities because I didn't see the greatness in the opportunity. All I was worried about was just get by another week. Just pay one more bill and survive. My wife and I were chatting last week. And once in a while, you just kind of think about old days, you know. And I had mentioned a former church member in a sermon last Sunday about with the high school boy who threw down the acid. And I thought, you know, I might have been mistaken about his wife. So I asked my wife, do you ever remember his wife showing up at church? I baptized him. I baptized his teenage boy. But am I wrong? Did his wife just not come? And she said, I don't remember her. And to be honest, I don't remember him a lot. I remember him coming, but, you know. And I started laughing. I said, you know, what's sad is in those early days, started a church in 1973. We got married one weekend. The next weekend, I opened the door on a new startup church, Rotary Club building we rented, and I had no members, just her. Our first Sunday was me and her. 1 week after we married. She thought she was marrying a preacher. I'd been traveling around the country for 2 years preaching. She thought she was marrying a preacher. We're going to travel around the country and preach. Hook up our travel trailer and travel around and preach. And then I called her after the engagement and said, no, we're going to start a church in Rockwall. Our first Sunday, just her, me, and I preached an hour and a half to her. Did not. We just sat down at the front of that little room we rented, and we talked about what we hoped would happen. And we prayed and asked God to give us strength and wisdom to know what to do and how to do it. And because we're going to hang in a shingle out, we're going to start a new church. That very next week, we never had to be alone again. Knocked on a door on Saturday of that week, and that family had seen our sign hanging in the door, and somehow didn't even know who, had never laid eyes on us or me on them, and somehow or another, just that sign, they felt like God said, y'all need to go help start that little church. And so he did. He laid down enough money to pay for 3 months' worth. The first 3 months of rent on our building were covered. He just laid it down on his coffee table. Will this help? I said, that'll pay the first 3 months of our rent. We got at least 3 months of survival. And then my wife and I started talking about people. I get Facebook email notices and Facebook notices from people who will say, Brother Danny, it's so good to see you on here. We were in your church in Rockwall. I don't know if you remember us or not, but you baptized my brother and my son on the same Sunday. And it's so good to find you on here. And I looked at the name and I'm like, oh. Called my wife, you remember somebody's name? No. Poor folks. They thought I was pastoring them. I'll tell you what I was doing. I don't mind telling you now. I wouldn't have told anybody then. I was surviving. I didn't have time to pay attention to anybody else's story. My story was the only one I was worried about writing because I wasn't sure what to do after 3 months. I might not be able to pay this bill. We both worked full-time jobs, and I hustled all day on Saturday trying to find somebody to come to church. I didn't know if I was going to be eating dinner. Went broke. We'd been married a year and a half or roughly somewhere in there, and literally went broke on credit card debt. Realized I'd charged more than I made, and we couldn't pay all our debts and went bust. And I don't remember some names of people that came, and sweet people. Can't remember what they looked like. They had some wonderful stories. If they knew I was saying this today, they'd feel awfully insignificant. The only good stories I remember in those 3 years in that first church were the bad stories. I like them. That's why I told you one last week. A boy in the hospital. Valium. Boy, I remember that one. I remember knocking on a trailer out in the country and nowhere. And a woman that just, I was scared of her at first. I'm not going to call her name because her daughters are my Facebook, or one of her daughters my Facebook friend. She might know. Oh, yeah, or I guess you already know now. And she scared me. I mean, she looked almost like a witch or something, like just a really bad makeup job. And I just knocked on the door, and she said, well, come in, I want to talk to you. And I said, is your husband home? Yeah, he's home, but he's working somewhere in the back. I just need to talk to you. Okay. Why don't you go get your husband first? Bring him up here. I needed protection. And so finally I went in, and then her husband came up after we'd been talking for about 15 minutes. I didn't really have anything to worry about. I just thought I did, but I remember it because I was afraid of her. That's why I remember it. People I wasn't afraid of, I remember the stories that Tamar. The people who thought they were probably at the bottom of my list, they're the ones I remember. The good folks that just came every week and helped us pay bills, I can't even remember their names. Should have sinned a little bit. Should have done something disastrous. Should have had a crisis. I remember the guy that walked in with a pistol sticking out of his belt one night drunk because his wife had converted and started coming to church with their baby, and she didn't want to live with him anymore because he was an alcoholic abuser. And he walked in one night just before church started with a pistol sticking out of his belt. And I looked through the little glass diamond cut out in the door and saw him walk in the front glass doors out off the street. We were in a storefront. I'm like, uh-oh. I'd never met him, but I guessed who he was because I knew she said, my husband hates for me to come here. He's angry. I can't live with him anymore. The church gave her courage to leave him. So he showed up with a gun to fix her. And I pushed the door open real quickly and stuck my hand out before he could think so I could slip the other one down underneath that hand and grab that pistol. And he locked up for a minute and reached for it, and I pulled it out and put it away behind me, and I said, you know, you can't bring that in here. You can't bring that in here. Well, it's mine. Well, this church is mine. You can't come in here with that. Well, give it back. I'm leaving. I'm not giving it back. You're drunk. You'll do something crazy. I want it back. I'm not getting it back. Go. So he left. And I put it in my desk drawer. And then I called the sheriff the next morning. Sheriff said, I know the boy. We've been called out to their house before. He's a drunk idiot. He's an abuser. I remember them. Isn't that crazy? We were sitting there talking just this past week. Can't remember some folks and can't remember them even after they send me a nice, sweet message. And I got their name and I can't put a face with it. They didn't do anything bad. There's a point to all this. Those folks that I tell you about sometimes, they felt like they were the worst, most hopeless cases in my church. They felt so insignificant. I know some of them just thought, in fact, I got apologies fairly often. Pastor, I know we hadn't been able to do this and that for the church, and I know y'all trying to build and and we need money for paint, but we're just trying to pay a bill this week. I understand. I got it. That's what me and my wife are trying to do, just pay a bill. Everybody is just surviving and hanging on, and every one of us caught up writing our own story, and there's no way in the world any of us would ever dream that we're connected to a bigger story than the one we're writing. It's just me right now, you surviving, trying to survive, trying to figure out what to do. Jeremiah 29th chapter, verse 11, we quote often. I love this story only because today Today, it points out that God has something bigger than my story. The story I'm writing still to this day is just surviving. I don't know how long we've been married, 45 years. I still live wondering, I don't know if we're going to make it or not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And when I say I don't know if we're going to make it, I mean I don't know if she's going to let me live or not. I go to bed carefully. I sleep with one eye open every night because I'm just not sure at 45 years. I'm not in the big picture. I have no virtual worth or value that I can imagine to God. I spend my life just trying to make a marriage work, hoping and praying my kids do okay and they stay married because I don't want them back. Hoping the grandkids turn out okay. That's just our story we're writing. I don't know about you. Now, some of y'all probably know your place in heaven. Thank you, God, for giving birth to me. And thank you for using me in your kingdom like you have. And I know you have great things in store for me. And God bless you because you know this verse. But I read this verse. I know the plans I have toward you of good, not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. Man, I like that. I like it today especially because some days when I'm feeling terribly, terribly insignificant, I have to remind myself that my life was never supposed to be like a huge example of anything to anybody. It is okay when you read the genealogy in Matthew. It's not offensive to any of you, is it, that you read Tamar's name in there? Are you offended? Do you think Jesus should have had a better PR crowd? If he had had some good writers, they would have never let Rahab's name. My God, do you know what she was? Yeah. That's why I think it's kind of cool that she's in the lineage. I know exactly what she was. I know exactly what she was. You've heard me tell one of the stories from my first church. You've heard me tell it so often, I hate to just keep repeating myself, but they're just such good stories of me pulling up in front of a house one day after I'd been to that seminar about how to get church building kind of people. The grass was literally knee-high. There was no driveway, just a couple of twin trails that disappeared in the weeds, so there hadn't been a car driving in there a long time. And literally sat there and realized the porch was broken, the porch eave was sagging, the porch steps looked rotten, and I could sit in the car and see that the front screen door was hanging about 45 degrees open, and the wire was pushed out like bubbles, just like the screen wire had been pushed out within. And I honestly almost didn't get out. Somebody had given me the name of that boy and that girl that lived there at church and said, go call on them, they're friends of mine. And I sat there and I thought, these people aren't church builders. They'll never help us do anything here. Oh, good Lord, they can't even mow and pick up trash. But then I realized that member would ask me, if I called on them. So I got out of the car. And I literally walked through that. We call it Dallas grass. I don't know what it is. It just leaves a little black residue on your trousers. And I shook it off when I got up to the porch. And then the steps were broken. And looking down, trying to find a safe place to step, I literally walked through a cobweb on that porch. And it just, oh man, I just pulled that junk off my head. And I stood there on the porch and I wondered why I was there. And I just disgustedly thought, dear God, why in the world? I moved around that broken screen and knocked to hurry up and get it over. And she came to the door dirty, disheveled, dirt on her legs. I mean, really barefoot and dirty, the mama. And I handed her a card and I said, hey, I'm Danny Carpenter. I'm just visiting people, inviting them to my church. And I just want to stop by and invite you and your husband to come to church. And she said, oh, well, please come in. No, it's okay. I just want to give you a card. And she was so insistent, please let me go get my husband. And I didn't want to. Honest to God, didn't want to. But I stepped inside that room. Honestly, the room was lit by one twisted cord bulb that hung from the ceiling. Might have been a lamp there at one time. Now it's just a cord and a bulb. Couch was sitting up on Folgers coffee cans. And there was no color in the couch, in the room. Everything just looked olive drab and gray. two little dirty girls stuck around from the door over there, and they covered their mouth and giggled and drooled. It looked like they were just dirty little girls, and they were giggling like I was weird or something. And I just stood there while the mother disappeared and nodded at the little girls, and finally she comes back in with her big old lanky husband, and he's got grease up to his elbows. He's been working on I know it wasn't a lawnmower because he clearly doesn't mow. And so, and he looked at his hands as he's walking across the room like this. And normally you do that, say, "Hey, I'm sorry, my hands are dirty." Not him. He looked at his hand and then stuck it out anyway. And I shook his hand. And I reached in with a dirty hand now and pulled out another card. And I said, "Man, I'm just coming by inviting people to church." I told your wife. He said, "Oh, thank you very much. We might come." Yeah, sure, right, whatever. And so I stayed as little as I could stay with them, just enough to be polite, and stepped out. And I walked back through all that. I'm telling you, there were diapers in the grass, dirty diapers, a bottle with clabbered milk in it, a nasty nipple. It's just filthy, just unkempt and filthy. Nastiest place I'd have ever seen since. And I got back to my car. I didn't even want that junk in my car. I wiped my trousers off, and I couldn't wait to fall down in my new, clean, air-conditioned car. And I cranked up the motor and waved goodbye, and I backed out to the street to go. And when I backed out, this voice in my car said, "Look again." And it was so clear and so strong. I thought, "What?" And it snapped my head. I mean, it was that clear, so I looked back. I thought the house might be on fire. It was such an urgent look again. And I looked, and there's nothing. It's that dirty mom and dirty dad waving a grease-coated hand, and two little dirty kids on a broken-down porch waving across a sea of weeds like I was their long-lost cousin, like they was glad to see me, and I was disgusted. And then the voice, while they're all waving, and I just politely wave back, and then the voice says, "Now that's how I found you. To get to your heart's door, I had to wade past years of neglect, nastiness. I had to ignore the filthy, cluttered playthings of your dirty mind. I brushed the grass from my trousers. I pulled the sticky cobwebs from my hair. I paused before I knocked, and I wondered if you were worth the knock. But I knocked, and I found you." So real was that, and so genuine was that speech to me as I was driving away, that I pulled off the shoulder on the side of the road at the stop sign just 100 yards or less away, and I wept. I bawled. I asked God to forgive me. So badly did I feel. Please forgive me. If you forgive me for my attitude, if you forgive me for my coldness, if you forgive me for my pride, my arrogance, I will come back to this family, and I'll come back the right way. I'll knock on their door to love them and win them. And I did. I made good on my promise. I came back. I came back as a friend instead of a pastor. And I was able to baptize Dave, and his little girls and him started coming to church, and his wife didn't. She couldn't see a big picture at all. We didn't know she was involved with a couple of people at her work, and she was just a survivor. They would pay her a little bit for her attention, and it helped with the family's debts until they kidnapped her and took her across state lines, took her to Oklahoma, tied her to a bed in a hotel, filled her body full of drugs, abused her for a week before they got caught. The authorities brought her back. They put her in one of Texas' 2 mental asylums. They put her in the one up at Terrell, Texas. I got the phone call to go visit with her. Trying to talk to her and pray with her in the hospital was like trying to talk to a 4-year-old child. Her mind had been affected by the overdose of drugs. Her spirit was ravaged from guilt and shame. She had enough presence of mind to know what she had done. It's amazing today that with all these years going by, I can stand here and tell you that I believe Diane is a part of the kingdom of heaven. I believe she's been forgiven. She just wanted me to pray with her, and I prayed. And while I'd be praying, she'd grab my arm and say, please pray, pray, Brother Carpenter, please pray. I'm praying. Diane, I'm praying. Let me just hold your hands. Just give me your hand. Let me hold them. Let me pray with you. Sometime later, some of the drugs would stop affecting her quite the way they did. She'd come around somewhere, someday she'd wake up and say, I blew my life. I wasted my life. My life is meaningless. I lost the opportunity to be a mother of two beautiful girls. Her husband tried so faithfully to raise the girls by himself with mom in the mental institution. And there's no point to this. I'm just going to wrap up right here with this and tell you that here's the significance of Matthew's genealogy. No matter how much you think you screwed up in your days of just trying to survive and get by, you're always going to be part of God's bigger story. So you messed up. And your little individual story is pretty pathetic. You really messed some stuff up, didn't you? There's some stuff don't you wish you could rewrite some chapters? Oh, I do. Boy, I've got some chapters in my life. If God had given me an eraser, I would love to erase some of them and just write them over. And I could do it better now. But at the time, under the circumstances, I did what I knew to do and what I thought to do. And I did it badly, but I didn't think so at the time. And so all of us come to a certain place finally in our years. We look back and realize I probably got less to be proud of than I do more to be ashamed of. Wish I could rewrite it. The point I want to make today is there's no need. There's no need to rewrite it. You did what you did. You were a survivor. You're just a little small fish in a big pond trying to write your story and survive the best you can. But let me tell you something. God knows the plans that He has for you while you're writing your worst chapter. God knows the plan. Where do you think God was when Tamar was out there trying to hustle Judah and seduce him? Why didn't you stop her, God, so the story would be clean? All you had to do was interrupt it. God, surely you can get involved in our lives well enough. You can clean us up in the process of life. Stop her. Don't let this be Judah's legacy. But God doesn't do that. We write our books. We write our stories. We make our mistakes. We blunder. And the good thing is that doesn't take you out of God's big story. That's just your story. Rahab, you'll always be the harlot. Rahab the harlot, by faith. There's the key. Her faith overcame her failure. And her faith is what put her in the grand story of God. I'll just quit with that. Keep the faith, because you're going to have lots of failures. But if you keep the faith, your faith will overcome your failures. And one day, all of us will sit around a grand marriage supper of the Lamb and realize how our little insignificant life was still connected to the grand story of the Messiah. I'm going to be in Matthew 1 one day. And then Ernest, God bless him, he wasn't much of a man, was he? But he gave birth to Danny. Danny, he gave birth to, well, are you hearing me? You're in God's story. I know you messed up. There might be a Tamar. There might be a Rahab. There might be a Ruth here today. There might be a Bathsheba. There might just be a lot of saints who never do anything wrong, and that's good too. It's just that you still will seem awfully insignificant unless you remember that your faith is what connected you to Abraham. Remember that connection? All of you who believe are sons of Abraham. You're part of that story that started in Matthew 1 with Abraham. And Abraham begat Isaac. And Abraham begat Danny. And Abraham begat Howard. And Abraham begat Scott. And Abraham begat Diane. And you got the connection? Your little story is in God's big story. He's got it. He's got the big one under control. You just keep living yours the best you can. Stand, please. I told you it wasn't a sermon. It was just a talk. Father, thank you today. Our lives seem awfully insignificant when all we're trying to do is survive, get by, figure out how to solve today's crisis, tomorrow's dread. We just live. Sometimes we get up and go to work on Mondays and wonder why we're even going. And we feel like we're just working for the man, and that's all it's ever going to be, is just work, pay bills, work. We feel like we're missing something, but we can't put our finger on what it is. Sometimes we're just overwhelmed by the insignificance of it all. Remind us today, no matter how small or sordid our stories are in our lives, we are all somewhere in the genealogy, in a chapter that ties us to the Messiah. And we thank you for that today. And somebody say, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Give the Lord a hand of praise today. Thank you for these stories, every one of these stories today, Father. Thank you for them. God bless you. Shake hands with somebody. Love somebody. Hug somebody. We'll see you next Sunday morning, 10:30.